Hi everyone, and welcome to the first day of your projectile motion lab, the planning stage. So today you need to work with your partners to plan out how you will take your measurements and how you will approach this lab. You are going to be rolling a ball down a ramp today in order to launch it and create some nice projectile motion. It's going to land on the floor a certain distance away. Because of the way the ramp is set up, which is horizontal at table level, it's going to create a nice projectile that has a purely horizontal launch. So that's going to help you in your calculations later. With your partners today, the first thing you're going to need to do is brainstorm how you are going to ensure that you can recreate this projectile motion every single time you roll the ball down the ramp. So think of some things you can do when you're at your lab station next class to ensure that the ball follows this path every single time. In other words, you want to make sure every time you launch the ball down the ramp, it hits the floor in the same spot. Now, the second thing you're going to want to figure out is you're going to want to know as much as possible about this trajectory. So let's think of some of the variables we've talked about in class recently. Things like V1, the launch velocity. And remember what I just said. Because the ramp is horizontal, that is going to give you some nice horizontal initial velocity when this projectile is launched. So purely horizontal initial velocity. Other variables we've talked about that are going to be important are acceleration, displacement in the x direction, and displacement in the y direction, and time. Those are all variables we've talked about. I'll tell you, nice hint, the impact velocity, V2, when the ball hits the ground, is not one you will need to consider for this lab, so you can ignore V2. But now I want you to think about these variables: launch velocity, acceleration, x displacement, y displacement, and time. Some of those are variables that you can measure easily. Some of them are variables that you already know because they're constants. And some of them are variables that you're going to have to calculate. So you need to decide in this planning phase which variables you're going to measure and how you're going to measure them. Hint, some of those measurements will require multiple trials, meaning multiple launches. Some of the variables you're going to know, so write those down right now. And some of the variables you have to calculate. Of the variables you need to calculate, think about what equations you know that combine those variables. Hint, think of your 5 kinematics equations. Which ones do you think will be important? So today you're going to plan out how to find all of this information about this very specific projectile motion. You may be asking, why do we care? Why do we want to do this? And that's because on the second day, after you actually take these measurements, you launch your ball, you take the measurements, you do the calculations that you're planning today, I'm going to give you a hoop. I'm not going to tell you how high off the ground the hoop is, but it's going to look like this. You are going to need to, using the height of the hoop, tell me exactly where the hoop needs to be placed relative to the desk in order for your ball to get through the hoop. And you're only going to be able to do that calculation once you've analyzed your projectile motion. So you're not going to do the hoop today. That's going to be next class. But today you're going to do all of the planning. You can inspect your station, but today you're not going to drop the ball or launch the ball yet. You're going to do all of that next class. Today is just planning. Plan as much detail as you can. Don't lose any ball bearings, and I'll see you next class.